Thank you very much. Wonderful question. What would I say is distinctive about this idea that is really like a landmark of Pope Francis? Distinctive means really teasing out what stands out, what is so important, what marks someone's life. And I'm afraid to say that one cannot just say only one element. I find several elements, and upon reading Pope Francis' documents ever since he began as the pontiff, even just from his first appearance and then to Fratelli Tutti, the very last document, there are several elements that stand out. And so what I find out really is that a culture of encounter is a lifeline that is embedded in the core of Pope Francis, for us to be a people who engage differences, who respect, mutual respect, but also who move from competition to collaboration. And speaking as an African, the culture of encounter in the African perspective, one could immediately understand it from the perspective of Ubuntu, meaning that we actually have a shared humanity, to put it that way. And theologically, I would say we are graced humanity. So it's a mission to meet the other. In a sense, I am defined, or I find my humanity in the other. So life, by all its joys and confrontations, calls for encountering the other person in their differences. So differences are not a threat. They are actually a call to enrich one another. Each one of us has something to offer to humanity. And one gets this from Pope Francis, Fratelli Tutti. And which means also it's an invitation to include those on the peripheries. You remember even one of his beautiful quotations that has become like a cliche, and sometimes that can lose its meaning. Pope Francis, who invites the church to be a church as a field hospital, meaning to go out and meet the other. Yeah. And quickly, if one goes again, Pope Francis will invite us to really realize that if we are to fight for peace, for social peace, there has to be hard work. And hard work means meeting those who are different from us, those who think different from us, those who hold religious views that are different from us. You remember Pope Francis, even at the height of COVID-19, he goes to Iraq. So what a beautiful gesture. A culture of encounter that brings political parties that are antagonistic together. Remember the beautiful gesture of Pope Francis, who brings the leaders of South Sudan. If you recall that image, South Sudan, and then he brings them together, invites to work for the people, and he kneels down and kisses their feet. Such a profound picture. I wish I had that image to show you. Kneeling, he has brought the people who are not talking to one another so that they can actually seek the common good. Rebuilding a culture of encounter also means rebuilding hope for social ties. And especially we can imagine what this means in broken places. Can imagine what this means in a country like mine, Rwanda, where people have been wounded. So a culture of encounter, of course, if we go religiously, theologically, from different religious views, there is no faith without encounter. Faith as of F-A-I-T-H. There's no faith without encounter. We realize that all the gatherings of Jesus in the Gospels happened around an encounter at a table, table fellowship was at the heart of Jesus, with Jesus' encounters. And no one is excluded. Remember, sinners, prostitutes, they all have a place. And I am always reminded of this beautiful encounter with Jesus and that woman who anointed Jesus. And remember, she came in as an intruder. She wasn't invited. But then in that beautiful dinner with a woman who was untimely, what does Jesus say? Wherever this gospel is proclaimed, it will be remembered in her memory. So Jesus, a culture of encounter that actually brings out those who are missing out in the conversation. You see, so beautiful. But also, since Pope Francis speaking to the international community of Sant'Egidio, who that has been involved in the search for peace, it's the culture of encounter is an act of authentic mediation. So bringing divided communities together. If you go to Gaudium Evangelii, we find Pope Francis who tells us actually the culture of encounter is a gospel mandate. It's the mandate of the gospel. That beautiful document of Pope Francis that came out soon after his pontificate in 2013. So there is a lot that is really imbued in this culture of encounter. It's a path to meeting those who are led to think that they don't matter. Actually, all lives matter, but there are people who have been made to feel that they don't matter. So a culture of encounter brings them out. It's an occasion for dialogue. And you know, when you are in a dialogue, you don't absolutize your perspective. Your perspective is nuanced, is challenged, you grow. God knows how much my own perspectives have been nuanced and changed. It's a way of actually fighting against a one-story narrative. You begin to learn that the others have their stories too, and their stories matter. I gather this from Rwanda. Encountering the wounded has nuanced my own woundedness. Actually, I must say it's an occasion also for conversion of heart and mind. One of the scholars who are dear to me, Bernard Lonergan, a Jesuit, he says we are moved when we encounter God to religious conversion, but also when we are in search of truth, intellectual conversion, but also when we are searching for authentic values, moral conversion. So encountering the other, encountering different perspectives can easily lead to these conversions. So there's something profound there. It's also an opportunity to challenge contemporary, actually, there is an opportunity there, but also there is a challenge. In today's social media, it's very easy to have virtual relationships. And the global media, social medias have really brought us together. And how wonderful this was during this ongoing COVID pandemic. So it brought us together. You just recall how we were able to see Pope Francis in that empty St. Peter's Square. And all of us brought together. Our mind raised to God to encounter. He invited us to dream bigger. That's an opportunity. But at the same time, with the encounters on media, there are also challenges. Sometimes we are in a family together, gathered, and everyone is on a phone. They are watching TV. So that which was supposed to bring us together actually sets us apart. There is a lot that one can say. There is no one single point of distinctiveness. There are several beautiful points that mark out the distinctiveness of this culture. . 「 For me to understand a culture of encounter, one will begin by the different negations I have encountered of that encounter. So because I have been near death, I have touched death, I have met wounded, I have touched the bones, dry bones in Rwanda. I have touched the lives of orphans who have no one else but only themselves. I have touched the lives of prisoners because of the genocide in Rwanda, who they too need life and need to be encountered. I have encountered children of mixed ethnic affiliation who sometimes are lost in the middle. They don't know what side to follow. So in short, a culture of encounter is a culture that breaks down biases. And you know, a bias is a distortion to integral development. Or if you go into scholarship, Lonegan will call it a bias is a distortion to intellectual development. Once you are biased against a group, you don't grow and you think they will not grow. You put them in a box. A culture of encounter is a culture that invites us to see and to look with compassion. A culture of encounter is a culture that not just to hear, but to listen. Culture of encounter is a culture that invites us not just to say what a pity, what a miserable life has been, like when someone watches my story at the United Nations. No, rather to say, I'm moved to compassion and to say, if this person has lived this, how can I actually even do better in the future? It's a culture that allows us to dream better for tomorrow. A culture of encounter. I usually take the beautiful story of since I'm a priest and a theologian, I draw from my own well. The story of Jesus resurrecting or resuscitating the son of the widow of Nain in the Gospel of Luke chapter 7. In that Gospel, remember that widow had just lost a son, an only son. And Jesus encounters them, and he does not only bring out the life for that dead son, he even touches the coffin. In the Jewish law, that would mean he makes himself impure. So a culture of encounter is a culture that risks. So we don't look only for our own interest, but for the interest of the others. And I would imagine he does not only touch the coffin when he says to the widow, don't fear. I would imagine he probably touched her too. So, and we are reminded that at the end of that miracle, the whole group, the whole crowd is jubilating. So a culture of encounter brings life where there was death. And what it means for me, really, it's a divine mission. Just recall the beautiful episode of God telling Moses, I have seen the suffering of my people. At the beginning of the book of Exodus. So I'm sending you. Go and encounter those who are actually those who mistreat my people, Pharaoh. So a culture of encounter is actually taking the risk even to go and meet the transgressor. So several areas of this, and in my own, if I were to go into my own life, a culture of encounter is really a culture that promotes life and respect of differences, respects of people as they are, of races, of peoples, the minorities of all sorts. We have different minorities. Many people can fit there, but also a culture of encounter now has to take care of families. We don't have families today, and good families today. We don't have a society tomorrow. So those are what the culture means for me. Yeah, I have a story. My life has been a test, but that turns out to be a testimony. So I lost my two brothers and my sister, and my father and my mother during the havocs of Rwanda, the genocide, and immediately after, especially my mother, because she had been beaten and she died after. And so after the genocide, I met the man who killed my two brothers and my sister, and not just killed them, threw them in a pit latrine, so in a toilet, and also exhumed the bones of my father who had been buried. So that's what I call meeting anti-life moment. And when we met, this is quite a long story, so I will not go into a lot of details, but when we met, this was in 2003, I realized how he knelt before me. I was at the tombs of my parents and my brothers and sister. The man had been released from jail because he had confessed to the government that he killed. And the law of the land then was, if you confess, you will be released and do community service. But released by the government, he had not been released by my heart. So when we met at the tombs, I felt as if I literally froze. I didn't expect him. And he knelt and he looked at me in the eyes and he says, Marcel, you know what I did. I confessed to the government. I am lucky to see you here. I am still burdened. Now that we are together here, would you have some space in your heart to forgive me? And these are moments in life when you don't know on what ground you are standing. One, you're asking whether he means it, whether you are safe in the first place, and whether even, do I even have the right to forgive on behalf of the dead? So all sorts of stories, the ideas in my head. But this is where I realized that forgiveness, something high, something bigger than us, invades us. By power, I don't know, I asked him to rise, and then I embraced him. And when after some minutes, I told him, Manirarora, his name, I forgive you. I felt free. Free, as if I was coming out of jail and the chains were broken. We both shed tears. We all both realized that he was wounded, I was wounded, even though I was walking outside. So that was a moment of encounter. I took him to a nearby pub, brought him a beer. We shared the beer, and life began again to germinate. I began to see that there was a human being before me. Prior to that, he was a beast. So that's a moment of a transformative encounter that has set me free ever since. And that moment, if I am ever to, if there is something I will live to remember, is that. And maybe that's why I survived the genocide, to tell the power of forgiveness. It sets you free. There's a beautiful story told by Desmond Tutu, the late Desmond Tutu, Archbishop. And he speaks of, I think he read it in front of the Vietnamese museum in Washington, DC. There are two soldiers who are standing in front of the museum, and one is asking, he's saying, have you forgotten what the people did to you in Vietnam during the Second World War? And then the other person said, I will never forgive them. Do you remember what they did to us? And then his friend said, then you are still in prison like them. So a culture of encounter actually is a culture that sets you out of your own prison. It's actually a culture that leads you to do the unimaginable, to do the impossible in this culture. So that was my case, doing the impossible. In the eyes of many people, they may think you are crazy, but this is where really life begins, germinates. It's like a flower that pops up from a tarmac road, and life begins. And I think that's what we should really promote, that life germinates. So that is one distinctive area of my life. So the power of forgiveness. And it's a long story that I try to cut short. Helps to imagine a new future. It helps to build broken lives. It helps to set someone free. It announces the miracle that the other person too is a human being, is not a beast. It also it shows the logic of superabundance of love, which goes beyond what is due, the normal definition of justice. So a lot of points there that has sprung from that moment of encounter. This is still really at the initial stage. So my points on this also will be preliminary. They are not yet developed, but I'm sure with time they will be refined and developed. I think it's good to look into the literature. One of the cardinals of the church whom I'm sure Pope Francis would admire is Cardinal Newman. Cardinal Newman writes a document which he called On Consulting the Faithful. And in that letter, it's a long letter, so it comes after a lot of struggle. It's a letter that would even really bring him now to the Catholic Church, Consulting the Faithful. And in that letter, he will say the church will look foolish if it only consults the clergy and the hierarchy and forgets the laity, the faithful. I think if we, so in this initiative, let's not only look to the experts, theologians, leaders. It will be also wonderful, even if this is really important, to listen to what the others also have to say on the grassroots, on this culture of encounter. And maybe to narrow down even this point, essentially later after Cardinal Newman, an Australian theologian also wrote another article. He says, what will Cardinal Newman write after the Second World War, especially after the wounding and the killing that happened during the Holocaust? And in an article he wrote in the 60s, the Australian Gerard O'Collins, he says, I bet if Cardinal Newman was to be writing today, he will say, consult the wounded, the marginalized, those who are on the fringes of society. They will have a lot to say. So while you have chosen us and we are grateful, let's not forget those who cannot be on this platform. So, and I think those two examples from that theologian and the cardinal, I think speak powerfully. So Cardinal Newman and Gerard O'Collins. So that's one. So consulting the literature that is there, you see, I just borrowed from them, definitely. But also, I think COVID-19, since this is really affecting us, has shown us that we are not safe until all are safe. Yeah. Just right now, only 30%, and I borrowed this from the World Health Organization, 30% of almost 8 billion doses globally that have been administered, only 30% have been in Africa. And only 8% of Africans are fully vaccinated, compared to 60% in higher income countries. Maybe I should repeat this. Just 30% of almost 8 billion doses globally that have been administered, they are only 30% are in Africa. And of these, 8% of Africans have been fully vaccinated, partly because also we don't have the infrastructure. And this is not to blame the North or the rich. Our own leaders also have to put up their socks. So you see this inequality. It's a challenge where we really have to move from competition to collaboration. COVID-19 has given us a lesson. If there is a virus in one country, it will catch us in another country. So some form of nationalization of COVID vaccination is good, but it's not sufficient. And Pope Francis has made this very clear. Also building the infrastructure that is needed, the prioritization of needs, and this goes to national level, to international level, really looking where are the needs that need to be met, the cancellation of debt in many areas. So these are areas certainly that it still needs to be fleshed out, but since these are initial thoughts, so how do we bring stakeholders together? Recently, Pope Francis made a number of ambassadors to the Holy See, and he was inviting them really to deal with this issue. And business leaders. So he leaves no one outside. So I wish we could do this. And in this discussion, I hope maybe if we could invite, at the time in the Vatican, if we could invite some of these leaders, at least a few representatives, would be great. So it doesn't only remain a discourse of scholars, but also with practitioners or people who have decision-making power. It would be great. So solidarity and dialogue are needed to confront the challenges of today. And this is not only limited to the pandemic, to the COVID pandemic, it also goes to climate change. It goes to human trafficking. It's another form of slavery. It goes to really and regrettably to the plight of women and their role globally, civilly, and in the church. So these are areas that needs a lot of thinking.